Community-centered, community-supported. Alaska Public Media. Alaska Insight is supported in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers just like you. Thank you.
Teaching teenagers in Alaska about how to harvest wild food is practical in a state that imports most of its food, and it can be fun.
I was just sitting here, and then I felt a little boop, 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 boop on my line. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got a nibble.
How do classes on catching and processing fish and game from Alaska's waters and land help students gain confidence in self-sufficiency? We'll discuss it right now on Alaska Insight. Good evening. Tonight, we'll take a look at some unique ways of teaching Alaska students about science and history through hunting and fishing. But before we get to that discussion, here are some of the top stories of the week from Alaska Public Media's collaborative statewide news network. 23-year-old Denali Bremer received a 99-year sentence on Monday for the 2019 murder of 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman near Thunderbird Falls, north of Anchorage. Bremer, 18 at the time, recruited other teenagers to help her bind, sexually assault, and fatally shoot Hoffman for an Indiana man, Darren Schillmiller, who was posing online as a millionaire. Schillmiller was sentenced to 99 years in January. Both he and Bremer have also pleaded guilty in federal court to related child pornography charges. A federal judge has dismissed a lawsuit brought by former Alaska State Senator Laura Reinbold against Alaska Airlines. Reinbold was banned from the airline after disputes over masking during the COVID-19 pandemic. U.S. District Court Judge Joshua Kindred dismissed all claims brought by Reinbold, who represented herself despite not being an attorney. Kindred said in his order that Reinbold failed to properly state her claims, including alleged violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Alaska's constitutional right to privacy, and her rights under the U.S. Constitution. A man from the Kenai Peninsula died in late January from the Alaska pox virus, according to the State Health Department. The death was reported in a health bulletin last week. In it, the department noted the man who died was immunocompromised and was the first person to die from the virus. Alaska pox was discovered in 2015 and primarily infects animals, including red squirrels. An epidemiologist with the Centers for Disease Control said she expects infections to remain rare, adding there is no evidence of person-to-person transmission. You can find the full versions of these and many more stories on our website, alaskapublic.org, or by downloading the Alaska Public Media app on your phone. Now for our discussion this evening, a topic that many Alaskans will identify with, harvesting Alaska's bounty from the land and water. The food Alaskans eat often travels thousands of miles by barge or truck.
In Wasilla,
but an after-school
I'm Tim
program
Rocky.
in the Matanuska-Susitna Borough aims to give students the skills to fish for their own meals, even in the middle of winter. As Alaska Public Media's Tim Rocky reports, during a recent ice fishing outing, one lucky angler went home with dinner.
A group of teens are getting ready to go ice fishing.
The Dena'ina that lived in this region were amongst the richest of all the Dena'ina because they didn't have to travel far because they got to fish and they caught fish year-round.
Before they get going, instructor Kevin Vaca does a safety briefing
We're going to be using the rods that we built last Friday.
and an important checkup.
If you guys want to grab hot chocolate, you're more than welcome to.
The adults help students punch holes in the ice and bait every hook with a piece of shrimp.
I keep feeling nibbles, but the fish won't get it.
The instructors hope that teaching the Dena'ina practice of ice fishing will encourage students to take ownership of their next meal. Vaca tells students they might pull a rainbow trout or Arctic char from the lake.
I think they're a big part of our culture here in Alaska. Whether you're Alaska Native or not, everyone fishes out here.
Onward and Upward, a nonprofit based in Palmer, hosts this ice fishing course. Education about food security and sovereignty in Alaska is becoming more common. In December, A Chugiak High School freshman biology class spent 2 days processing a moose. Most of the meat was donated. The Alaska Farmland Trust estimates that 95% of food consumed by Alaskans is imported from the lower 48. Indigenous Alaskans have always harvested nearby plants and animals for food, and although subsistence activities may slow down in the winter, wild food sources are still available if you know where to look.
We think it's important for students to realize that they can do this as a person, and it's super easy for them to get into. All you need is a little piece of wood and some string, some fishing line and a hook, and you're able to go out and fish, put food on the dinner table for your families.
It's been about a half hour since hooks went in the water, and no one has gotten so much as a bite.
I'm not sure if continuous jigging helps or if just a little more patience is better.
It's starting to look like everyone might go home empty-handed.
I got him!
Until
There we go, we got one.
Kiana Tassi pulls a 14-inch rainbow trout from the ice, the only fish caught by anyone in the group.
I was just sitting here, and then I felt a little boop, 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 boop on my on my line, and I was like, oh my gosh, I got a nibble.
Is this the first time you've ever caught a fish
Yeah.
ice fishing?
Never gone ice fishing, but it's the first time I ever caught a fish.
Tassie takes home a meal that wasn't shipped here, and a memory she won't soon forget.
What a fun story. Joining me tonight to discuss harvesting from Alaska's waters and lands and the importance of teaching these skills to students is Kevin Toothaker. Kevin is a workforce development and cultural activity coordinator for the Kanik tribe. And Brian Mason is a science teacher at Chugiak High School. Welcome, both of you. Thanks so much for being here. So that was fun to watch, ice fishing. Kevin, I want to start with you. Tell us about the cultural events that you attend throughout Mat-Su Valley and what you're helping to teach at these gatherings, what sort of the idea is.
Well, thank you for having me. Truly, we're here to visit to go and share anything that's related to the culture and the history of the Dena'ina in the Mat-Su Valley, just so we could create more of a cultural identity, so folks can understand that there was a thriving society there in the upper inlet long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so just sharing culture and
just sharing
helping
culture.
to teach about that. You said the Dena'ina people fish differently than Inupiaq people. Talk about these distinctions and what you're talking and teaching about them. I grew up jig fishing, and I didn't realize there was different ways of doing it.
Well, I was sharing with the students that up north, like my mom was from Unalakleet, and when she would go fishing for tomcods and stuff, they would use two sticks when they fished, and they would use the sticks to pull the water up and pull the fish up out of the hook, and then they would shake it off, and then the fish would go on the side, and then they wouldn't have to take their gloves off or anything, and then they would lower it back down into the water, and then just bring it back up. And
that's brilliant.
And then with the Dena'ina, I don't know how different it is between the different cultures and stuff, but the Dena'ina have jigging sticks as well, and it's used at different means. But yeah, I was teasing the students that they had to hold their mouths different and stuff to be able to catch some bites.
Try the different fishing methods. Brian, you combined ideas from a world discovery curriculum with Alaska Studies and applied for cultural education harvest permits. What does this involve? Talk to us, tell us a little bit about the permit and your efforts to get that going in school.
Yeah, so the Alaska Department of Fish and Game offers these cultural education harvest permits, as the name implies, to help educators that are trying to teach cultural practices. So within our own school, as you mentioned, so my biology class is teamed up with a Alaska Studies class, and in that class, they learn about various Alaskan cultures, cultural practices, subsistence, in addition to Alaska's land and wildlife. And then, of course, as a biology teacher, there's the anatomy aspect of it. So this project is really just the goal is to try to meld the two worlds, right? To understand the interplay between Alaska, the place we live, the people who have always lived here and who still live here, and of course the ecology of moose and anatomy and tying everything together, along with hopefully also providing students with those that may eventually want to pursue something as far as gathering their own food with some of the skill sets that would be helpful in doing so.
The moose photos that we saw in the video story were taken during the third time that you did this process. And this was actually the first time that you brought the entire moose into the school. How do you start with the students even before the moose arrives? And And also handling the concerns over freshmen being freshmen and having sharp knives. How do you quell the goof-off factor?
Right. That's a great question. So, I mean, in the days leading up, well, weeks, really months leading up to this, as far as the lessons in culture and the biology lessons, that sets the framework for what we're actually going to do. And when I know that I'm going to be heading out hunting that particular weekend, we discuss what that Monday might look like if I'm successful. But a lot of it honestly comes down to relationships with the students. By this point in the year, I generally have a pretty solid relationship with most of my students. And my classroom is a lively place and we like to goof around, but I make it clear with them that not today, right? That, like, I mean, they're encouraged to have fun and enjoy the experience, and yet, you know, in 3 years of doing it, I've never had an issue with regards to safety. They've always stepped up their game and done much better than I think many would expect from a bunch of 14-year-olds with knives. So,
yeah, you're quite brave to undertake that project, and I'm glad it's working out well. Kevin, talk about the practical side of what you're teaching, both in, I know that you teach students how to construct jig sticks of their own. So what's the effort there with teaching them that skill and how to use them?
Oh, actually, my father and I, he actually showed me how to develop the jig sticks with the ends and then wrapping it up there. But it was truly an opportunity to go to an evening event. One time we went to where there was some foster youth there. We went there to sit there and kind of tell them stories as we built a jigging stick with them, and then we just kind of ask them how they're doing, and then just relate to stories based on the discussion we're having with the individuals and stuff. So each student will be a different story depending on what they're asking about or what they're curious about. So we'd be able to just kind of go into a different direction, share with them what they're looking for.
And just build some nice connections that
Exactly,
way. Sure,
exactly.
that's
Just
great.
visit with them and just make sure they have a good experience so they go outside and foster and encourage going out more and
absolutely.
getting out in the country.
Having a good experience with adults is always good for young people too. Tell us about the work of Onward and Upward and what the main effort is for this organization.
Onward and Upward is a tremendous organization. I believe that they do experiential learning and that culture with a cultural vein in their learning, because they work with the Kanik tribe quite a lot in sharing culture and the history in a thoughtful manner that's sensitive to how the indigenous or the Dena'ina lived in the upper inlet and everything. So they very thoughtful about that, but they're very they do experiential learning. Like this summer, they took some students out of Nome, and they went out in the wilderness for like a week or 2 weeks out in Nome, and did a lot of visits out there, and just do a lot of connections. And I can't say experiential learning enough, but they just get out there and connect to a lot of the social learning and the emotional learning with their experiences out in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm. Because there is a lack, as you had mentioned before, of recorded history of the Dena'ina that lived in the region, are you working to compile what is available and infuse that in your teaching?
Oh, most definitely. I do presentations. I go to elementary schools and middle schools and high schools. I've gone to boards for various nonprofits to share about the Dena'ina history. Like if there's a specific region, we'll look at the area and see if there's any significant Dena'ina sites in that area. We've done the presentations. Like we did a presentation up by Willow, and then there was around Willow there's the mouth of the Deshka River, and I didn't know until we started doing this research that the Kroto village, which is at the mouth of the river, there was a North Kroto village and a South Kroto village. But long before the Russians were up here, there was a fish trap up there, up the Deshka River, that supported 4,000 Dena'ina in a summer. 4,000 Dena'ina in a summer, and that was a really urban area in the valley. Kanik Lake was another urban area where there was a lot of villages, and then there was a lot of villages along the bluffs along above Cottonwood Creek as well. I think that's the thing that surprised me the most when we started doing the research, is seeing how prevalent the Dena'ina were spread out. And then learning more about them and learning about the Dena'ina here in this area was that they were the most sedentary of all the Dena'ina. They were the richest of all the Dena'ina, so they were able to travel the least amount to get their resources and everything. So as a result, we were raided a lot too. So in the upper end, the people don't realize how much the raids were and stuff. With the Alutiiq and Alchina, they would come up and try to take the resources that we had.
Interesting, fascinating history. Thank you for bringing some of that to the air tonight. Brian, talk about how you distribute the meat when you get it all processed, you're cutting it up, and then you're sharing it, and how that sort of fits into what you're teaching about this overall.
Right. So one of the lessons that I think the students learned in their Alaska Studies class was the importance of sharing among Alaska's indigenous people in taking care of people within the community when there is a harvest. So in keeping with that vein, when we harvest the moose, so first of all, each student does take home one package to share with their family. Probably 2/3 of my students have never hunted or fished, and for many of them, this is their first experience having wild game. So it's important to me that they have that experience getting to share it with their family. But then the rest of the meat gets distributed within our community to families within our school that could use some assistance. And time and again, that is something that students have talked about, really appreciating having an opportunity to help people out. And that actually gets back to your earlier question about freshmen with knives. I think another part of the reason why they really step up their game is kind of twofold. I really try to stress with them the seriousness that comes with taking a life, right? I mean, it's a fun day and we have a good time with it, but we don't take it lightly, right? An animal gave its life for this experience, and I ask them to respect that, and they seem to really, that resonates with them. But also that this is someone's food, that this is food that is going to nourish families in our community, and that there's something really important about that. So I think that helps with the experience.
Yeah, that's such an important point. The first time I went hunting and shot a deer, I was asked later how I felt about it. I said, I felt a little sick.
Right.
And the person that was talking to me said, that's good. You should feel a little sick. You took a life. So that's a really important part of all of this, is that respect, of course. Brian, you also work with cultural advisors like Yvonne Peter, who is a vice chancellor for Rural and Alaska Native Studies at UAF. How do these folks help also kind of round out this instruction that you're giving to students?
I mean, honestly, they can provide a perspective that I can't fully, honestly. I mean, so I was raised in Alaska, and I was raised in a family that hunts and fish, and also commercial fishes as well. And you know, from my childhood through today, my freezer is full of moose and caribou and sheep and salmon and halibut. And yet, I recognize that those with more direct cultural connections to Alaska and Alaska's indigenous people can provide something that I can't, or at the very least, a different perspective. So in fairness, Yvonne Peter, he was invited into this by another man, Ralph Iluk, who is the Alaska Strong coordinator. He's currently based at East High. So he made that connection, and it was fantastic. It was so great. And so when he visited with my class, and he did it by video chat, and it was actually on the morning of the experience, and he was able to see what we had going on in the class and immediately started pointing out some differences in how he and the people in his village prepare a moose, and what they do initially after the kill, and the importance of those practices. So one thing he talked about was they would take the head off the moose and point it in the direction of the village so that the moose could see in the direction of the people that it was going to nourish. And that was something that I was never raised to do and was completely new, and it just provided my students a different perspective, but also recognizing the value of the practices of the people that have always been here. And it was just a very, very powerful moment, and I was very, very thankful that he was able to do that with us.
And really driving home that point that, you know, this is a serious undertaking. This animal gave its life for feeding these folks, and it's a good reminder for young people so that they remember the seriousness of these undertakings. The lessons that you're teaching while carving up a moose, biology, anatomy, of course, but what else is involved in that?
Man. So I mean, I could go 100 different directions with this. I think teamwork is a big part of it, because taking care of a moose, especially in a day and a half, is a huge team endeavor, and I think that's really important. The ones we've already hit on, but it just can't be reiterated enough, the honor and the respect for life and for the place we live in, the really also by extension the value of intact ecosystems and the value of protecting the land that we rely upon, and that even those of us that live in a urban or suburban area are still connected to the place that we would live in. So I think those are some of them.
Yeah. And Kevin, I know that you give presentations in schools and teaching the history of the Dena'ina people of this region. How do you decide what to share with others when elders talk about the past, especially when sharing stories that have trauma?
Well, I don't tell any of the stories that the elders tell me without their express permission. Most of the stories I've been telling in our presentations are from Shampeet's book or other research from Shampeet's book or Alaskana research from the libraries and stuff. But we just really wanted, the idea behind this was to create more of a cultural identity, create a history of it. Like I had no idea. There was the last chief of Susitna Station was a 7-foot-tall Dena'ina chief. You know,
Wow.
he was a 7-foot-tall man, and his Dena'ina name translated to English is he makes himself clear. Right? But then there's what I didn't realize either was moose were Johnny-come-latelys and stuff. 200 years ago, there was no moose here. 150 years ago, there was no moose here. There was caribou. The Mat-Su Valley was known for this caribou. Government Peak is, the Dena'ina name is where the horns come from within. There was so many caribou there that they thought that the mountain was made out of horns and stuff. So it's really amazing that a lot of that history is stuff that really, really fascinates me. One of the stories that our elder did tell me was when her father was in his youth, he used to ice skate from Knik to Eklutna, straight across the inlet. And I had no idea that and she told me that the upper inlet has never frozen ever since the Eklutna power plants come online. But the Knickers used to ice skate right across to Eklutna. And then Shampeet had also said that there was a Russian Orthodox church that was moved from Knik over to Eklutna when the town of Knik was dying. So they moved the church in big chunks, and I just assumed they moved it around the roads. But visiting with this elder, she said that they moved them over in big chunks straight across the ice to Eklutna.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So.
You know, you talked a little bit about place names, and when you think about how the Dena'ina place names connect to the people in the place and often what happened in that place, and how that differs from most naming that takes place today for mapping. How do you talk about that to students and the differences in, you know, people just naming things to put them on a map as opposed to people who name them for very specific purposes?
It's really fascinating. I think that's a part that really, really fired me up when I was learning about it, because I learned that they didn't have maps. They didn't use maps. There was no maps. It was the naming process itself was the maps, so that there was a the most recent one is Red Shirt Lake. Is the Dena'ina name for Red Shirt Lake is where object is lowered into the water. That's the name of the lake. It's not Red Shirt Lake. The object where the is lowered into the water, but is fed by the object that is lowered into the water creek, and it's right next to the hill that is by where the object is lowered into the water lake, and so it's all connected in that area right there. So they all it's related to that area. There's another place by Croto Creek where we Run in Fear Trail. You know, and that was where the trail, they were raided so often that's when they were raided. They ran up that trail in fear. So, I mean, it was right next to the Run in Fear Creek and stuff as well. So it's just really related in the process.
So for both of you, beyond knowing how to cut up a moose or catch a fish, what do you hope this work ultimately does for young Alaskans, both Indigenous and non-Native Alaskans?
For me, for my kids, I think it's just this is what Native to being around. Because my kids are, I'm half, so my daughter's a quarter, and my grandkids are an eighth. So whatever we could do to try to help create that that connection to their heritage, I think is very important. And I think residing in the Mat-Su Valley I still believe it's the fastest growing village in Alaska, with more people coming from rural Alaska and coming and settling in the Mat-Su. So we have folks that are coming out there from all over the state of Alaska again, and so it's our job to try to really make them have a connection with the tribe. I mean, the Knik tribe, my heritage is from Unalakleet, so the Inupiaq heritage, but my children only knew the Knik tribe area. So whatever we could do and having that connection, that cultural connection, to look at the programs and camps and anything we could do to try to help share the history is very important.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, your thoughts there, your efforts at beyond just the practical side of this, what are you hoping this leaves young Alaskans with?
I guess mostly just a more profound connection with the place they live and the people that live here. I think there's the oft-cited joke that Anchorage is only 15 minutes from Alaska. And you know, I've had students that have lived here for a time and maybe haven't experienced much of Alaska beyond the urban and suburban area and much of Alaska's culture and, you know, a lot of the things that come with the place we live. And this is obviously just a small part of it, but I think it's maybe an important part for some students. And then as for the practical side, I was thinking about this when I was watching your video that started the show. Learning how to hunt is a daunting endeavor, and I was raised doing it. And for somebody that might want to choose that, how do you even get started? So
Right.
I do hope that for a student that might want that it gives them some opportunities.
Well, thank you both so much for being here this evening. It was really a great conversation. I appreciate your time. For Alaska students who didn't grow up in families that garden or hunt and fish for their food, the lessons in how to properly harvest the bounty from Alaska's land and water is valuable beyond just filling the freezer. It's also a lesson in ethics and respectful use. And for students who have been taught how to hunt, fish, and gather, these classes affirm the importance of understanding the history of using wild resources and honing skills to provide food for yourself and your family. That's it for this edition of Alaska Insight. Visit our website, alaskapublic.org, for breaking news and reports from our partner stations across the state. While you're there, sign up for our free daily digest so you won't miss any of Alaska's top stories of the day. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend. Good night.